I'm sure many of us know someone, if not you, who's felt uncomfortable talking about religion and money or just have feelings of shame or guilt about it. Welcome to Yahweh's Money, a podcast where we discuss the crossroads or intersections of religion and money. We're going to go deep into topics like tithing and saving and debt and so much more from the religious view. I'm your host, Shay Cook, CEO and founder, Crusaders for Change, LLC, and our co-host is Vanessa McNelly, one of our financial counselor, coach, educators. Let's talk about God and money. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Yahweh's Money. Today, we're going to be talking about love and lending, and I'm one of your co-hosts, Shay Cook, and we have our other co-host, Vanessa.
Hi, guys. I'm so excited to be here.
And we also have the wonderful, amazing, beautiful Heather Baker here joining us, one of my friends, colleagues, known her for seems like forever, and she's just a loving, amazing human being. Welcome, Heather.
Oh, thank you for the welcome. Thank you for including me.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here today. Any words you want to share about who you are and, how we know each other?
Certainly, I am an AFC. I am certified. I am proud of my association with the Department of Defense. I was born into a military family, and I was so excited for today's topic. My dad was a chaplain and spoke on this. And so this is a full circle amazing moment for me to pass on not only my certification and financial knowledge, but to come to it from a faith-based perspective. As this was spoken about so often, whether it was in sermons, whether it was in our household. So this was the absolute opportune moment for me, and I'm humbled.
Oh, that is beautiful. I love when God works, which he always does. But that's beautiful in the full circle moment. Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Heather. Well, our first question or topic to discuss is our personal values and beliefs can influence our decisions and shape our behaviors. Do you think it is wise to lend money to family and friends? Heather.
I think that you have probably tackled one of the stickiest wickets we could ever discuss. And so I think that all decisions, but especially this one, need to be considered prayerfully. I love the guidance that we're given in Deuteronomy 8:18 that reminds us that our wealth comes from God. So that gives us a higher obligation to be responsible with our wealth. I also think that it's important to remember that he compels us and commands us to act righteously. With that being said, I don't think that always, just because you can or you feel that you are obligated, even in a spiritual sense, to loan money to families. And that's not popular. And so I think that when we talk about the potential of lending, I think that first of all, it's a prayerful consideration. But second of all, I think we need a factual consideration. And I think that includes who we're lending to. Are we lending to our children to give them a hand up and to give them a start? Are we lending to parents and we honor our parents for they provided for us to get us to that point? Or are we lending to kind of the wayward cousin who doesn't have a great track record? I think that's a really important consideration. And I think it's difficult for people. It's uncomfortable. I think one way we can take away from some of that discomfort is to, first of all, be honest. Honest with ourselves and honest with those that we may be engaging with. I think the second really important consideration, whether we should lend to family or not, is the why. Are we contributing to really horrifying behavior? And do we need to demonstrate some tough love? Which answers your question in that way, Shay. Probably no. Are we honoring those relationships or giving back to those who honored and made us who we are? boy, that turns it into more of a yes.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's not just a yes or no answer.
Yeah, looking at that too, I totally agree with everything you said, Heather. It's so hard when you're in a position that someone is asking to borrow money and you know that what you're loaning for is not something that you would 100% agree with. And how do you do that with somebody that you love and care about and still show them that you love and care about that person? Because they see it as, oh, well, they're not helping me because of X, Y, or Z. So it's so hard when you're in that situation because, you do have more sometimes and less sometimes. So you can help more at certain times of your life than others. And it's such a sticky situation, like you were saying. When do you do it? How do you do it? What is the best way to go about doing it? And then, looking back at it, do you look at it as a loan or do you look at it as a gift? And I think that's kind of our mindset we have to go into that with too, because sometimes we're repaid, sometimes we're not. So if we kind of go into it with, if I'm loaning and I feel comfortable loaning, it's more of a gift than a loan.
I love how you said that. And I agree. I think that your point lends to what type of loan is it? So in my financial counseling practice, I do dissuade people from co-signing. If you want to help out, let's keep it clean. And if you are able to offer that gift, I think if it is significant, that again, we're honest and we're honest and upfront. I've seen families actually write contracts out so
Yeah.
that there was 3 years down the road, there was not, it eliminated the possibility of misconstruing. But we know that it is damaging when that isn't repaid. So let's look at some of the prevention. And I love what you said. Do we treat it as a gift? Do we treat it as a contractual obligation? Do we? And I think that goes back to being honest. And sometimes it seems so obvious, just be upfront, but it's so uncomfortable that I mean, I imagine people listening now are kind of squirming because this is awful. And we've all been in that situation. So I do avoid or try to avoid the legal ramifications as far as co-signing on a credit report, co-signing with a repossession. We don't want to think the worst of people. But again, if we're asked by God to be righteous with the wealth that comes from Him, we owe ourselves that righteousness. And so I think that that's a huge consideration. But I do think that most often it's best to consider it a gift and to be pleasantly surprised if they pay it back or if someday they pay it forward, because that's also an option.
That's really good. Yeah, according to Lending Tree survey, in 2020, more than half of Americans, 53%, either borrowed or lended money to a loved one. And in Deuteronomy 15:7-8, it says, "But if there are any poor Israelites in your towns when you arrive in the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard hearted or tight fisted toward them. Instead, be generous and lend them whatever they need." And so my answer to the question, do you think it's wise to lend money to family and friends? I say no. I say gifts only because I've learned that wasn't always the case. At 43 years old today in 2022, that's what I say. Back in the day, it's like, oh yeah, I'll lend because I have no expectations for somebody to pay me back. And like Heather says, people, maybe they pay you back and you're happy about it and that's great, or they pay it forward, but I have no expectations. If I ever open the Bank of Shay back up again, I only give gifts really, and it'll be 0% interest loans. So, and Deuteronomy 23:19, it says, "Do not charge interest on the loans you make to a fellow Israelite, whether you loan money, food, or anything else." So I've never charged a family or friend interest. I've heard people do that. And maybe I should have, but at this point, like I said, I only do gifts. So what advice would you give to someone who is struggling financially, but wants to financially support a loved one?
I think, again, we go back to where we came from, and you cannot deny someone else's righteousness.
Mm.
And so I've seen, and we all know Mima will get blood from a stone if she needs to. And so sometimes it is heart-wrenching when you see somebody struggling financially and that loans to a family member out of their sense of their spirituality, their belief, out of their prayerfulness. And that means they're maybe not getting clothes or they're cutting back on groceries to make that happen. So while we hate to see it, I think sometimes technically the answer looks obvious. If you can't afford to do it, then why are you even thinking about it? But now we get back to the messy a bit, right? Where it's convoluted and it's a spiritual decision and it's a familial decision. And so I certainly have cringed, cried, and watched somebody do it. But at the end, when we look at that, we don't get to judge. I think that's the second part of money and lending in families, that it is not sometimes just an interaction between the lender and the lendee. We get everybody else chiming in. We get Auntie going, "How dare you do that?" We get criticized. And so I don't think secrecy is the answer, but I also don't think we need to announce our gift or our intention to God and everybody, because it becomes disrespectful to the spirit. And that is not allowed. So my answer in short is, if somebody's going to do it, you're not going to stop them.
Yeah.
You can give them the best, but at the end of the day, I am only asked to respect them.
Yeah, that's something that I think I've struggled with, like all of us. As we're growing and we're learning, early years, you do get everybody involved, and there's just too many hands in the pot. So, when I was younger, my ex-husband and I, we bought a house with my grandparents because my grandfather was one of those guys who never used credit, and he couldn't get a bank loan because he had no credit because he bought everything in cash. So that was something, he and I discussed, my grandfather and I. But my parents got involved, my brother got involved, my ex husband's family got involved. And there were so many people involved in the mess that, you didn't know what you were actually signing up to do with that person, because everybody else had, questions about things. They had their input that they were trying to give to you. And, we didn't have a contract. It was my grandfather. But when you go back to that now, I'm like, if I ever did that again, it would just be between myself and my grandfather, and there would be a contract. So I think it's one of those things where, if you can do it and the person that you're dealing with, and their spirit and their heart, and that this is something that's going to come from, a place of making that person's life better. It's something that you should look at doing. But gosh, when you get too many people involved, it is a mess and it is crazy. And I cannot tell you how many times I cried over that in my 20s because you lose the gift in all of that, I think, and the helpfulness and all of that. So yeah, I think if we can kind of work through that and not involve everybody, yeah, I think it should be something that, like you said, not kind of keep it a secret, but who needs to know? Nobody needs to know that. And a lot of times when we look at people who talk about those things, they're being boastful, and that's definitely something that we don't want to be.
Yeah.
I love that. I've had it where a lesson that I learned early on when I first started counseling was assessing the debts of a client, a young man. And there was an IRS debt, and there was also a personal loan to his grandmother. Well, again, we look at the technical and say, we should probably get that IRS issue worked out, at least the payment plan. And he insisted, no, I have to pay her back first. I have to. Again, as a counselor, my job is to give you the best educated opportunities and choices with explanations and clarifications. My job is not to decide for you. So I think we look at lending money sometimes with a really heavy hand toward the lender, but we also maybe need to consider the burden on the person receiving that.
True.
And they don't want the shame sometimes.
Exactly.
Maybe they were in a desperate moment. They don't want to be at Thanksgiving dinner. Like you said, Vanessa, who all knows that my aunt did this? I don't want to eat turkey or try to choke it down when they're all like, you didn't do this yet. And so we need to look and consider the burden on both parties, because for some, even if the loan was not asked for or requested, it was offered.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you a moment when I was offered money in a very desperate situation. It was probably the most humbling, pathetic, horrifying moment in my life that somebody offered that out of a generous spirit, because I needed it. And so I think we have to also balance not giving the heavy hand to the person issuing the funds or giving the gift, but also how is that going to impact the receiver? A hand up, and certainly, like you both have said, a gift never to be held over their head in an uncomfortable moment.
That's good. Yeah. In Matthew 5:42, it says, give to those who ask and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. And that's a good point, Heather. I don't think we're a lot of times focused on those that we're lending to or giving to, instead of how it affects us as lenders, givers. Of course, like Vanessa's saying, we don't want to be boastful and arrogant about it, but there might be some, we might be dealing with there might be trauma from it, especially if you're always doing it. There might be some shame on your part, that why am I always the one that, I have to give. And so I have shame that I always have to give and other people don't, but maybe God gave it to me because I'm more responsible. That's how I always look at it. Like, God gives me more because I am more responsible. But when people are always asking, there's that thin line, because you don't want to constantly give and just feel like you're being used. So that's a whole nother episode.
True.
The whole use and abuse the abuser. Wow. So according to a survey from creditcards.com, 28% of co-signers saw a drop in their credit scores because the primary borrower paid late or not at all. And 38% of the co-signers had to pay some or all of the loan payments because the primary person didn't pay. I don't believe, and Heather said this earlier, in co-signing for anyone, but maybe a spouse. I've never co-signed outside of with my husband. I just haven't personally. But how do you guys feel about, in more detail, about co-signing?
I absolutely, when you learn finance and when you learn about counseling, you learn there are no absolutes, right? You can make a case for any financial situation, and it might not be popular and it might not be the majority. This is probably one of the few times that I would challenge people, make a case to compel me to co-sign, because I can't see any which way to do it. I can maybe dream or create a hypothetical where perhaps I was returning the benefit. And so maybe that was done for me. I could maybe see, again, if we co-signed with a gift and with the intention of, if you can't pay it back, I will not let myself be put in a credit score hole. And I could possibly squeak out a tiny, tiny, short term cosign where there was absolute evidence of the ability to pay it back. But like you said, Vanessa, it wasn't the inability to pay it back. It was a systemic issue that there had not been previous credit, or there had not been sufficient credit. And so it was going to be one and done and raise them up, give them a hand up, not the hand out, right? But boy, you would really have to, it would have to be pled and it would have to be absolutely outlined for me.
My only thing with this is the only time I would feel comfortable is if I was co signing for a child who was
Mm,
just coming out of college years or high school years and they really don't have credit yet because, they're
Mm.
learning and they're growing. And I think when that happens, there have to be rules set in place. And it has to be very purposeful when you have those conversations about it. But yeah, co-signing to me is something I am not comfortable with. There is a reason that person needs a co-signer, and I think we have to kind of go back to that too and look at the reason why they have to have somebody in that situation. But I think there's a lot of other ways to help and assist that doesn't involve you getting put in a position where you are stuck with something that someone else needed or wanted, and you're having to kind of take on that burden or that debt. But yeah, to me, the only time I would ever even consider that is when, I have a kid or, a niece or nephew in that situation, and they are really trying to get things going in their life.
And when I looked at and prepared for this, I looked at why are we lending? And if we're lending as an opportunity to teach a financial lesson, like you said, to a child, teaching them the responsibility and the value of your word and of paying back and of doing it on time, I think there is some value to that so that our children or generations that we support and love
Hmm.
don't end up where we were, because we all have a story, because nobody taught me how to lend when I was 15 or 20. And so here we sit as very capable professionals who all have whoops in our background that probably has hurt with it too. And
mhm,
so I can see a wee bit of value in those very, very, very few and very confined specific instances, Vanessa, that you
Hmm.
elaborated on, that it can be an educational opportunity so that they don't perhaps experience what we have.
Right.
yeah, exactly. Or hand up, like you said. That's great. And according to a survey by bankrate.com, nearly half, 46% of adults who lent money to family or friends reported having a negative outcome. 37% said they lost money, and 21% experienced a damaged relationship with the borrower. So, how do you approach a loved one who owes you money but has not paid you back?
Okay, out of all of the sticky wickets and all of the discomfort and all of the feelings and all of the expectations that we've talked about today, this is probably the easiest question for me to
Oh,
answer.
okay.
And the answer is, what's more important, the relationship or the money?
Mm,
What is the import to you? Um, Again, if we prayerfully consider that we don't get to judge, we don't get to hold this over, we need to be judicious, righteous, and fair. We also answer as the lender. We answer to how we lend.
mm-hmm.
And so it then comes down to, if we take all of what we've said and we set up specific parameters. We do it in certain circumstances. We do it as a gift. And then we get to the ugly moment. The decision is really, really clear. And that what is more important? Is it that you extend grace?
Mm-hmm.
And it can be tough. And extending grace is not, fine, I'll let it go, but I'm going to glare at you or side eye you at Christmas. That is not grace. That is not righteous. That is not what we are asked in many places, particularly in Deuteronomy,
Mm-hmm.
about money. That is not it. So it truly then becomes that moment of value. It truly becomes that moment of prayerfulness. And if you extended and gave that gift and it was not returned, God knows.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
so
Right.
I think that that's again where we get into the messy, is people either weren't able to or didn't make it a priority to pay that family member. And now you've created a legacy where your nieces and nephews know that Uncle Rob or whoever it is was kind of the one that didn't do the family right. No, 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 no. That is not what we're here for. And that is not what we're compelled for. And so the answer is pretty easy. What's more important? Go with importance. And grace means grace. Great. And if you need to pray and you need to work on it every day, that's okay. But you need to do that.
I think this is a two-sided answer for me. So first off, if we go into lending with the spirit and the thought of it being a gift, we know from day one what the expectation is. I think we get caught up though when we find ourselves in a position where we've lost a job or we have extra bills coming out. There's medical expenses we weren't expecting. When we find ourselves in a position that we need the funds back for something to kind of keep us on track so we don't fall behind and in that position. And I think that's a really hard one because we don't know what the future is going to hold. So if we find ourselves in a position where we overgive or we overlend, that's where we have to be very careful, in my opinion, that we make sure we do it in a way that if something were to happen, we're okay and we don't need that. But I think a lot of times we backtrack with this. We think about these things after the fact versus ahead of the game. And that's when we get ourselves in trouble, is when we look at it and say, well, I shoulda, woulda, coulda from the beginning. But yeah, I totally agree what you're saying as far as, relationships are definitely more important than money. But at the same time, we don't want to be stuck in a relationship where we're the givers and they're the takers all the time too. So I think there's so many components to this that there's not really a clear answer for me.
No, I'm so sorry. I just loved how you said that, because we do have to say, hey, we honored the wealth that we were given from God by honoring you, but in essence, you did not return that honor, that respect. You did not return that integrity or righteousness or gratefulness. I think it goes back a little bit to what you said. Hey, if I'm in that situation, back to honesty. My intention is I will pay you back. I need to let you know, and I'm happy to show you. I did have to go to the ER and I did have to pay this. Could I? So that we encourage our clients to have a line of communication with their creditors. Don't just ignore the letters. Don't just ignore the calls. Try to reach out, try to negotiate. But somehow when it comes to family, all bets are off. I think, again, we go back to what you said, Vanessa, up front, not behind, not late in the game, but up front. And the lines of communication can be so important. It can actually bring you together with that honesty.
But we know borrowers, family, and friends that will totally avoid us, like the collection agencies and everything else they're avoiding. So, but I think it's clear in the word. It's not always as easy said as done. But in Proverbs 3:27-28, it says, "Do not withhold good from those whom it is due when it is your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, 'Come back tomorrow and I'll give it to you,' when you already have it." Or Luke 6:34-36 says, "And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked." So, like Heather says, God knows. So, even if you don't get your money back, God will somehow return the favor, or whatever it might come out in the wash. Don't expect it back. But it just sometimes sucks when a family member totally avoids you, or it's like, doesn't want to talk to you because they're feeling the shame because they know they owe you money. So it's like it's not me trying not to talk to you, it's you not trying to talk to me.
Right.
So wow, it's such a crazy topic. It can be really messy and just really complicated for some people, but we do need to show that grace. And I agree with all of what you ladies are saying. So any final thoughts?
One of the most interesting situations, and as we look at the holiday season coming up, that I saw was that there was the forgiveness of the debt in lieu of a gift. and to start a new year or a new time. I think COVID humbled us all, whether it was family relationships, whether it was money, whether it was expectations. And we would be shameful if we didn't take some of those lessons. So I think, again, if it's appropriate, if the Spirit moves you to do such, if your prayer answers keep coming back, one opportunity for peace is that honest, forthright, I loaned you money, you weren't able to do it. Family is more important. You can say honest sentences, I'm disappointed. You can say, this probably won't happen again. Don't come back. But in the name of all that's holy, including family, I release you from that. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, whatever that that religious affiliation compels you to do. I have seen that, and it's actually been a very peace-giving moment. And it isn't appropriate for everybody, but certainly something to consider after all is said and done.
And I think too, we have to remember that just because we say no or we can't give what they want, it's okay to take care of yourself first. And I think that's something that we struggle with, especially as a Christian, because you want to give and you want everyone else to have and to not do without. So I think first and foremost, we have to realize that just because we take care of our needs first, that does not mean we're letting other people down, that we don't have a humble heart. So it's okay to take care of yourself first before you give, and it's okay to set limitations on what you can give.
That's good. Sometimes the gift is just no. And I love, like Heather says, forgiveness of debt in lieu of a gift. I wrote that down. That's something definitely to consider. Well, thank you, ladies, for joining us for another episode of Yahweh's Money. That was fun, Heather and Vanessa. And you can tune into current and future episodes of Yahweh's Money wherever podcasts are found, including Apple, Google, and Spotify. Thank you for joining us today. And remember, it's always better Yahweh's way. Thank you for listening to this episode of Yahweh's Money. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the crossroads of religion and money. If you have any questions or suggestions of topics you would like to hear us tackle, please email us at yahweh@crusaders4change.org. Also, we would love to hear your feedback on today's episode, so please leave us a review and remember to subscribe to our podcast. To hear all of Yahweh's Money's latest episodes, please visit us at www.crusaders4change.org or wherever podcasts are found. God bless.